This is a bit of a heavy subject, so if you're not ready for that, maybe revisit this video later when you are, but this is important. So I would appreciate anyone listening through all of what I have to say, because I think that it's a more important subject than can be condensed into 140 characters or 5 minutes of sound bites. I can't. My ex, Samantha Ravendall, has a podcast that she produces with her best friend. It's called Approachable. And toward the end of August, they uploaded an episode called How All of Our Breakups Went Down. And as you might expect, there is a section of that podcast dedicated to the breakup between Samantha and me. Now, before I say anything about it, I think if you haven't seen it already or listened to it already, that you should, without me trying to bias how you feel about it. So I've put a link to it in the video description. You can pause this, listen to that, and I'll start talking again here in, we'll say, 5 seconds. Okay, so at the time that I'm recording this, of the people that I know of that have seen this and expressed themselves about it, people have had various reactions. Some people have said that I shouldn't be judged on things that I did 8 years ago, and other people have had an almost weirdly delighted reaction in that they finally have something that means that I can be canceled, or the evidence that this community is officially dead. And I was a little bit surprised by those reactions, because I feel like I have been pretty open about having committed sins in the past and using those to create who I am now. And maybe it's just that in this particular retelling, hearing the details, it's somehow worse than you thought it was. I'm not sure, but I would like to state that, especially since starting the what I'm doing right now daily vlog project, I have not tried to hide anything about the fact that I have done some hurtful things in the past. And to be clear, I don't personally believe that it should be required of public figures to air their own dirty laundry. I'm okay with doing it, and I like sharing that part of myself with you. But, for example, I don't think that it would be fair of Samantha's supporters to demand of Samantha that she disclose every instance in which she has been hurtful to somebody to prove herself worthy of their support. They should look at what she's putting out into the world now to make that decision. And hopefully by the end of this video, you'll understand why I feel that way. I imagine that if, after listening to that episode, you feel upset or confused, that it's probably because the idea of me that you had in your head is incompatible with someone who would act that way. And to that, I completely 100% agree. I believe that the person that I am now is incompatible with acting that way. But I'm not going to deny that I did act that way. I only want to say one thing about the degree to which I agree with Samantha's retelling of that story, and that is that from my obviously biased point of view, I don't think that the way she told that story was entirely fair, but I also don't think that it is possible for either one of us to tell that story in a way that is completely fair. If you've ever experienced breakups, imagine entrusting the other parties involved with being solely responsible for telling the world the canonical set-in-stone version of how things went down. Probably that's not something that you would be comfortable with. And what that means in this situation is that I am an unreliable narrator. You shouldn't take anything that I say at face value. You should, as in all cases, consider the source. And I would hope that you would do me the courtesy of also applying that logic to anything that anybody else says in this situation. What that definitely doesn't mean is that either Samantha or I in this situation is being malicious, because it is possible for two people to believe in their own version of events 100% and have discrepancies between their versions of events. Interpersonal relationships are complicated and they're messy. And that's just how life is. So, all of that said, what I don't want to do is nitpick at the individual things that Samantha said, because ultimately I think that misses the point for two reasons. The first being that I don't want anyone to walk away from this thinking that I in any way want to discourage people from talking publicly about having been hurt. They should be able to communicate their own experiences however they want to whomever they want. If Samantha had told me that she was planning to tell this story on her podcast, I would not have asked her not to. I would have asked her to include a little bit of extra context, which we'll get to later. But the second reason that I don't want to delve into a point-by-point examination of everything that she said is that ultimately I don't think it matters. We can go the whole rest of this conversation assuming that everything that she said is exactly the gospel truth, and it doesn't change the point that I want to make with this video. I'm also not here to deflect or minimize or invalidate Samantha's experience here, because I have no reason to doubt that the way that she told that story is how I made her feel. And I take responsibility for that. I acted horribly, and at this point in my life, I'm mature enough to stand up and admit that I acted without regard for another person's heart that had been entrusted to me. Anyone who has gotten to know me, has gotten emotionally close to me in the last 7 years, has seen the evidence of the guilt that I carry around from the relationship with Samantha and from the relationship that I had before Samantha. In both cases, I did things that were incredibly mean and callous and self-centered and thoughtless. And it was in the aftermath of the relationship with Samantha that I looked back at those two relationships and finally had the thought, maybe the problem is me. The day that I found out about all of this podcast reaction stuff, I later happened to end up on Facebook, and a YouTube associate of mine had posted a screenshot of a tweet. And the tweet says, "Does it ever fuck you up thinking about how old versions of you still exist to people out there? People you haven't talked to in years remember who you used to be and nothing about who you are now. And they're out there with memories of a version of you that kinda sucks." I think that pretty well sums up how this whole situation makes me feel. The Michael Aranda of 8 years ago is an almost entirely different human being than the one sitting here right now. And the irony for me is that this current version of me, this version of me that right now you might be saying, "How could you? I thought I knew you." This version only exists because of the sins that I've committed in the past. It is an unfortunate reality of being human that the main way that we learn, the main way that we grow, is by making mistakes. And in high-stakes situations like interpersonal relationships, that unfortunately means to get better at life, we have to hurt and we have to be hurt. If there's anyone that you can think of that you respect immensely because of their personality, they forged that personality out of the mistakes of their younger selves. What has hit me hardest about this situation is that this is not the first time that Samantha has talked about this publicly. In March of 2016, she was very active on Periscope, and I, since the time that we broke up, have continued to be a fan of everything that she's done with her career to this day. But back in March of 2016, I was watching all of her Periscopes, and in this one particular live stream, she recounted stories of breakups, including ours, and it was similar to what was in that podcast. Listening to it, I started crying, and not because I was embarrassed or because I was afraid that now this information is out there or whatnot. It was an empathetic cry of feeling pain that I had caused her in the past. So after that live stream ended, I sent her a text message, and the conversation that ensued involved a lot of honest apologies, and toward the end of that conversation, she told me that she believed that I was indeed sorry for what I had done, and that she believed that I had changed. She had seen evidence that I had changed for the better. So to me, in that moment, it felt like we had buried that hatchet together. So when this podcast episode came out, my reaction wasn't, "Ah, shit, now people are going to hear about my deep, dark secrets." My reaction was confusion about why she left out the part where she and I have had mature conversations about what had happened. And not only have I apologized, but she believes that I am sorry, and she believes that I am now a better person. Because that's the part that matters. If you make a mistake, no matter the size, after the damage is done, after the pain is inflicted, What matters is what you do next. Do you just forget it and move on? Or do you take responsibility, apologize, and figure out how to be better? I spent years agonizing over what I had done after Samantha and I broke up. In that time, I was lucky enough to meet Caitlin Salem, whom many of you know, and she was instrumental in helping me figure myself out in that time. She got to witness firsthand just how much I tore myself apart and built myself back up in the wake of that relationship with Samantha. And one thing that Samantha's retelling of that breakup doesn't communicate is just how much I really did love her. It would be unsurprising to me if I learned that what I did has completely poisoned any potentially good memory she could have taken out of that relationship. But it was the pain I felt over having lost someone that I loved that much, the pain that I felt over having hurt someone that I loved that much, that forced me to reflect very deeply and make fundamental changes to my values. I don't think it's exaggerating to say that a lot of the parts of me right now that I'm very proud of exist because of that relationship showing me how hurtful certain aspects of my personality were. And there are dynamics that exist right now in my relationship with Kelsey that it's plain as day to see how they are a direct response to things I did wrong in the relationship with Samantha. For example, Kelsey is constantly asking me what I think she should wear or how I think she should do her hair or her makeup, and I just refuse to answer those questions. My response is always, you should wear what makes you happy, or you should do your hair how it makes you happy. And of course, she comes back with, but I just want to, look cute for you or whatever. And I understand, and I appreciate the sentiment, but that's just not a thing that I want to engage in. Or we've actually gotten into some heated discussions because she sometimes makes jokes about how one of us owes something to somebody else. And when I started dating Samantha, I moved to Canada to be with her. And I held that over Samantha's head for the entire relationship. If in a particular moment I felt like she wasn't being attentive enough or whatever, I didn't sit down and start an adult conversation like, this is how I'm feeling right now, how are you feeling right now? I just went straight to, I moved to a different country for you. You owe me. And in hindsight, right now, it's easy for me to see how horrendous that is, but in the moment, I genuinely felt that. I didn't feel like I was being mean or malicious. And I think that is what is so scary about stuff like this. It's easy to dismiss bad behavior if you can see it as being malicious or evil. It's significantly more difficult to address problematic behavior that feels correct and figure out why it shouldn't feel correct. I think that it would be of tremendous value, not only for myself, but for anyone who cared to listen, to dive into why I acted the way that I did, why I felt the way that I did, why I felt justified in some of these actions. But I think that is a little bit out of the scope of what we're talking about here, and I feel like I've rambled on long enough already. So we'll talk about those in a separate setting. My point here is that I understand if you're hearing all of this for the first time and you are upset or disturbed. It was disturbing for me to listen to. So even though for me it's been painful to see some of the things that people have been saying about me, even though it's been painful to watch people who have supported me for a really, really, really long time deleting their Patreon pledges or unfollowing me on Twitch. I get it. I understand. I don't like that my current self is being shown in the light of a version of myself that I don't like any more than you do. But if 8 years down the road, there are still consequences to endure for my actions, I'm mature enough at this point in my life to not try to sweep it under the rug. And I'm going to stand up and take it in the chest. If after all this, you feel like this isn't a community that you can be a part of, that's your prerogative. And I wish you all the luck in the world, amassing a group of friends comprised solely of people who have never made mistakes and who've never done anything incredibly hurtful to somebody else. I want this community to espouse the tenets of personal growth and forgiveness. And if you aren't able to move past things that I did 8 years ago, even when the people involved, the two people involved, have moved way past them and become much better, more empathetic people in their own right, then I don't know. Maybe this isn't the community for you. And maybe that sounds kind of... I'm not trying to be facetious. Like, if you feel that way, I genuinely understand. I guess the last thing that I want to say before I leave is that just like the last time this happened, I reached out to Samantha because my preference in any situation is to address the dirty laundry only with the people who own that laundry. But unfortunately, right now, Samantha is on a month-long trip to Africa, and me sending texts to her Canadian phone number so far has only resulted in message not delivered errors. It's been, 4 or 5 days at this point, and I feel like waiting until she gets back would mean that this was just sitting out there for too long. If anything, I hope that the fact that my first response to this was to reach out to Samantha to try to have a mature conversation rather than stem the tide of people jumping ship by rushing to Discord or YouTube to deny everything. I'm hoping that is evidence enough of how seriously I take this and what my motivations are in this situation. I would like to thank people who, after hearing about this, reached out to me and asked me questions about it. It means a lot that you would at least be interested in what I had to say before jumping to any particular conclusions. If after hearing this video, anybody wants to talk to me, the open invitation, message me privately. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have, with one caveat in that I will not answer anything that involves me airing other people's dirty laundry. I'm happy to talk to you until the end of time about my own faults, but not anybody else's. And then I guess actually lastly, there have been a few people I've seen using what Samantha talked about in her podcast to disparage my relationship with Kelsey. And to that, I would say she is a completely self-sufficient, intelligent adult capable of making her own decisions. And if you have a concern about something, feel free to reach out to her. She is intelligent enough to speak for herself. I think that using something like this to talk poorly about her is shitty. Anyway, thank you guys for listening, and I guess I'll see you around.